Welcome to the Restoration Activation Project video commentary series. Hi, Mary Ann here, and I'm glad you could join me. In this video, I'm going to be picking up where I left off in the prior video, which was a commentary on a recent James Bartley interview with 35-year mental health care practitioner and counselor Jerry Marzinsky, and his insights and experience with paranoid schizophrenics. And the commentary, the prior commentary, revolved around the discussion and exploration of three key points that arose during the course of this interview, and I've been sort of unpacking and expanding upon them. And I'm going to pick up with that in this video and continue by also delving into various means of applying this to your self-mastery work. So yes, it directly relates, and unless you watch the prior video, this commentary probably won't make a whole lot of sense, and in any case, you'll get a whole lot more out of it by watching the prior, or I should say part one of this commentary. And you'll find a link for that below, as well as links to the original interview and James Bartley's site. You'll find all that below this part two of the commentary, all right? So I'm going to dive right in and pick up where I left off in part one. I was speaking to how our thoughts are not our own and where they originate, and some of the implications of that. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit more today before I come back in and proceed with that and how to begin applying that information. In the prior video, I explained how there are various mental planes throughout the whole of consciousness. And these mental planes comprise all varying types and forms and degrees of progressive and regressive thoughts. And how pardon me, each of these planes corresponds to various densities and dimensions. And so, in other words, for our particular reality, this density and dimension, there is a correspondent plane of thoughts, a mind, the mind plane, from which thoughts originate from, and that it is by way of vibrational compatibility that these thoughts come to mind. Primarily the vibration of our emotional energies, mixed with other energies as well, the energies of our three primary energy centers, our overall energy field, but basically primarily deriving from our emotional field of energy. And the thoughts, again, they come into mind because they are vibrationally compatible with those energies. Now, drilling down just a little bit further, these thoughts are varying or represent or vibrate at an unimaginable number of rates of frequency or rates of vibration, because they are expressions of all varying degrees and levels of intensity of regressive and progressive consciousness. You and I, and all expressions emanating throughout the whole of consciousness, are a unique mixture of both regressive and progressive consciousness, and thus vibrations moving through us that we're generating and that are moving through and around us in our energy centers, in our energy field. So now I'm going to remember varying degrees and levels of intensity. For example, some bad thoughts are a whole lot more regressive than other, quote, bad thoughts. Excuse me. For instance, having a thought that a thought of self-doubt, you're doubting yourself or in some way not trusting yourself. It's one thing to attract a thought that, oh, I totally screwed up here, frustrated and, that sort of thing. That's a different degree. It's a regressive thought, but that's a different level of intensity of regression or regressive consciousness than, say, a thought about, I hate myself. I mess up so bad. I need to do myself in. You see, there's varying degrees of progressive, regressive consciousness expressed through thought. Okay? Now, we can zoom out again. The whole of consciousness, pure, so to speak, the pure field of consciousness, container and source of all expressions thereof. In other words, you could call it unexpressed consciousness and vital energy. Comprises the perfectly integrated and balanced mixture of purely regressive consciousness and purely progressive consciousness. Perfect balance, pure regressive, pure progressive, serving as the ground, the container of all expressions in varying degrees of progressive and regressive consciousness unfolding throughout the whole. In other words, it is only the unexpressed field, the medium of consciousness, unexpressed, but that medium comprising all of us, working through and within us and around us, that comprises pure unadulterated regressive consciousness and pure unadulterated progressive consciousness. And the pure potentiality and vital energy coming together or starting to move together, beginning with thought. That is the primary tool of creation in this mind-body complex. Thought. Everything begins with thought. The principle of mentalism. And I'll refer you back to the 7 principles of creation, or the conditions of creation in our universe, because you really need to get a deep understanding and knowledge of those principles in order to fully begin working with consciousness and thoughts and emotions and our energies, working from a higher level understanding of how those work and interact. excuse me, as part of the self-mastery process. That's baseline information, the balancing process. As consciousness unfolds through its expressions, consciousness units and vital energy units come together, beginning with thought, to formulate or express the there is always energy involved. Always. We are beings, expressions of energy. Energy, energy, energy. That's another baseline concept. I say concept, truth, that needs to be fully embraced and constantly being further and further explored, pardon me, as the work of self-mastery. Beginning to view and approach everything from the perspective that all is vibrational energy. And getting back to what I said earlier about the mixtures and the levels of or degrees of intensity of regressive and progressive consciousness in the form of a thought. That's another one of the key principles, the key creational principles and conditions of our universe. It's the principle of polarity. And understanding that it is only the whole of consciousness, unexpressed consciousness, that comprises 100% regressive and 100% regressive consciousness. Every expression that comes into being, that unfolds, that becomes manifest from that fundamental medium of consciousness is a mixture and varying degrees of regressive and progressive consciousness. Now, depending upon the granularity of the expression, in other words, a thought's can be a pretty granular expression. And what I mean by granular is that if you envision the whole of consciousness, this is just for the sake of trying to get a handle on what I'm conveying. If you envision that as a dot, a center point, the center of all that is, ever was, ever will be, and that all expressions spiral outward from that point in all directions, the further out the spirals extend, the further away from that central point of pure, unexpressed potential vital energy, the more individuated the expressions become, so to speak. And by individuated, I mean the appearance of separation of that expression from the totality of consciousness becomes more intense, we'll say. The illusion of separation becomes more apparent, even though it isn't the case. But that's the experience of it, that it is more separate, that it is somehow separate from, as it spirals further and further outward from that center point. Okay, so that's what I mean by granular. And in our current perceived third density third dimensional reality with a little help of with a little help from programming and DNA manipulation from our regressive friends, our non-human friends around, as well as humans. The illusion of separation has just been amplified and built up within us by these various means of conditioning and so forth, so that that illusion is seemingly real to us. And yes, we are unique expressions. We are individuated expressions. But the purpose of jacking up that illusion of separation in us is so that we do not see the wholeness, the true reality of what we really are, how we really work, how this reality really works, and our power, what we're capable of. It's been all about suppressing, suppressing, suppressing our true capacities, keeping us separate from that. Not only from our ability to step into those, but even our awareness of what we really are. The conditioning has been so intense and long running. And that conditioning has led to the regression of the mind-body complex, the human mind-body complex, from its original state of physicality and awareness of the greater cosmos and all the different realities and densities that are out there that we at one time had access to. So that, understanding the law of polarity, the principle of polarity, the principle of mentalism, understanding the principle of cause and effect, which is another way of expressing the ongoing perpetual balancing process of consciousness through its expressions. You, me, every other being, every other piece of matter, every other reality, every other universe, every other realm, everything, whether physical or non-physical, everything that is an expression. Call it a holographic slice of the whole of consciousness. And the totality of consciousness, as I said earlier, is a perfect and perfectly integrated balance between pure regressive and pure progressive consciousness. It, in all of its expressions, the expressions that unfold are varying degrees, levels of intensity, and mixes of the two. Another aspect of that is that no one expression or combination of expressions of consciousness, therefore, are ever completely regressive in makeup or completely progressive in makeup. In other words, the darkest, the seemingly most regressive of entities or beings or, whether physical or non-physical, cannot by their very existence be 100% regressive consciousness. Can't be. That is only within the medium itself, the medium of consciousness, the totality of consciousness, unexpressed. And that's just the way it works. So those are important understandings. Now, I'm going to walk into now some of the baseline principles, the foundational aspects of mastery of thought, and two different approaches to that and how they work, and ways you can experiment with that. And I recommend using both approaches and figuring out which approach is right for you at what times and so forth. Okay, the foundational work of self-mastery is learning to quiet the mind, stilling that monkey mind full of thoughts, and being able to quiet it enough so that you can begin observing as the witness, and I described that in the prior video, but as the non-emotionally engaged, non-judgmental witness of self, observer of self, quieting the mind. And one of the ways that many people work to do this is through the process of meditation, wherein they find a way to find a quiet, uninterrupted space to shut down thought. And shutting down thought clears the way for consciousness to begin flowing through the mind-body complex. And it's an amazing process, and the ability to do this is very important. And I'm referring now to what I consider to be, and this is not a judgmental term, but what I call passive, closed eyes meditation, where you find a place of solitude to do that practice. And that's good and well. In fact, many people need to start in that place. But ultimately, self-mastery is about being able to learn to do that when you are not alone. And I'll get more, I'll later on, I'll jump back to this, but ultimately that's the goal. To bring consciousness, soul consciousness, core self consciousness, as the guiding force through this body and into and through our creations and interactions with this reality. That's the ultimate goal. Now, and that's the ultimate goal, because that is how not only that we will come in contact with, coming in contact with higher order knowledge beyond thought. Yes, it will be ultimately come to us by way of thought, but clearing the path for higher order knowledge, understandings, and perhaps in the beginning in ways that have nothing to do with thought. But this knowledge is just impressed within the mind-body complex, and ultimately begins being drawn to us or drawn into us because our vibrational compatibility, our rate of vibration is higher in doing this. And so this higher order knowledge begins coming by way of higher order thoughts through which we can begin to create. And it is only through higher order awareness and knowledge, and ultimately opening us to higher order energetic and psychic capacities, or reawakening us to those that are latent within us. Many of you out there already are experiencing and using and working with higher order capacities and administration of various energies and abilities. But we all have them within us, various different types. Not everyone has necessarily the same capacities, but we do and will have certain things in common over the course of time. That we'll all be able to have certain capacities in common, certain baseline capacities in common, with some being more adept in one or two areas than others, and they being adept in one or two areas, more adept in one or two areas than others themselves. So, but beyond that, the point being to begin working with our reality to raise its density and dimensional levels and capacities. In other words, to free ourselves from the current state of things and condition of things that those of us on this conscious journey of awakening seek. That is the only way it's going to happen. And the only way to get to that point is through self-mastery. And that begins with mastery of thought, mind center. Okay? And hand in hand with that, and I don't know that I'll get into that in this commentary or if it will be continued. I'll pick it up in another commentary, but thought and emotion are directly connected because it is the vibration, remember, the vibration of your emotional energies that attract, primarily, that attract thoughts into the mind-body complex. So working on both is critical. Now, in order to begin the process of self-mastery, it is necessary to be fully present in the present moment. This is how the work is accomplished, whether you're working on your energy centers, clearing emotions and all the distortions and beliefs and attachments and ego identifications, requires focused presence in the here and now, in this moment, from one moment unfolding into the next. So presence is vital. And I'll put a link below. There's an article on my website that talks about presence and a couple of other factors that are also really important, but being fully present and intentional in whatever activity process you're about to engage. Clarity of intention. Focused presence, clarity of intention. Okay? Now, and I also recommend, and I'll put links to, a really good understanding of the balancing process. How consciousness is always seeking to balance its expressions between themselves, through themselves, within themselves. It's really important, and I'll put links to, I did a two-part commentary going into great detail into this important understanding that needs to be embodied in order to really make deep progress, solid progress on this journey. Because self-mastery, how can we master ourselves until we fully understand and begin to embody what we really are? From what we've derived, have risen from, consciousness itself, that we are energetic expressions of the whole of consciousness, individuated in our present state. And without understanding, if we can't, we must understand self, true self, as well as understanding, our physicality, taking care of that, but also what's going on around us in physicality, the workings of society, what's really going on behind the scenes, cause and effect. Zooming out to the multiple density perspective, higher order perspective, that we are not the only beings, humans are not the only beings in this reality. There are other beings at higher level densities interacting with this reality who've basically been pulling the puppet strings of the goings on in physicality, in the physical, the 3D, third density expression of this reality. A big thing, and I'm sure most of you watching are already there, you get that we're not alone, that humans are not the only expressions, sentient, intelligent expressions of consciousness, and that core self, soul, this version of it in this mind-body complex, we are not at the top of the food chain, so to speak. Not only that there are other beings and entities, but higher density. In other words, their levels of awareness of what's going on is greater than ours. They can see things. They can, some of them can move between timelines. They can see further down the road, the timeline, various flows of timeline, backwards in time. They can look, they have, think of it like this. It's not that they're any more intelligent per se, but look at it like this. You're on the ground on a city street. You're walking along. You see what's going on around you. You're looking around. You see some traffic. You hear the noises. You see other people moving around. But there's someone at the top of a great, tall building. Wouldn't their perspective of the goings-on be a little broader than yours? Yeah. They could see a little further down the street. They could see further back from where you came. And that perspective would also be different, in a sense. When you have higher order perspectives, higher density, then that in itself enables higher order capacities and abilities to function within whatever reality. Okay? So it's not about that they're smarter in that sense, those are references to intellect. It's a different type and level of awareness and understanding of what beings really are and how reality really works. And having that information, that knowledge in the hands of regressive expressions, regressive beings, is not so good for those of us that aren't regressive dominant beings. So, as part of the perpetual balancing process that's going on within consciousness, those of us who have this innate sense of this, excuse me, this horrific imbalance between regressive and progressive consciousness in this reality at this time, that's what the driving force in us is all about. That's what we're here to do, to bring progressive creation into this reality, to bring it more into balance. And in order to do that, to make those significant, meaningful change, which can only be the result of higher order understandings, progressive consciousness, and I'll put information about that below so that you can get a better understanding of progressive, regressive, so positive, negative, service to others, service to self, whatever you want to call it. But the two fundamental types of consciousness. I'll put links below to that so you can get a better handle on that. What those actually mean in terms of our work here. But we're here to bring balance in that way, through progressive consciousness, in your own unique ways. The unfoldment of unique purpose. The bottom line is progressive consciousness and creation. For those of us that have came into this reality, and either from the time we can remember or later on in life, we have had this deep sense, understanding that things are not in harmony here. Okay? And the way to get to begin creating in ways that will change this reality, that will assist the reality itself, working in tandem with the various forces and energies that are coming back into this reality now as we near the end of the evolution cycle of this particular version of reality. And as it's nearing its nexus, the point of convergence, the the change, the shift from one evolution cycle into the next is already underway. And the most important work we can do in this, through this instrument, through this mind-body complex and this reality at this time, is to work in harmony, to assist this unfoldment, to help ensure that it begins merging into, that there are this timeline, or perhaps multiple others, unfold into more consciousness, progressive timelines and realities, as opposed to this regressive dominant reality that this evolution cycle has unfolded through to this point. That's our mission, if you will. And that process begins with and can only unfold through the process of attaining self-mastery or regaining self-mastery, depending upon your perspective. So, getting back now to various means of becoming master of your thoughts. You're approaching the process now of meditation from the perspective of a deep understanding of the balancing process, the fact that you are energy, an energy body comprising multiple layers and expressions of energy, but you are an energy body. And that this mind-body complex is this remarkable instrument for progressive creation. It's built to facilitate that process. Hence all of our, if not yet currently expressed, our latent capacities. These abilities that people are, more and more people are experiencing. These abilities coming to the light. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we are nearing the convergence point of one evolution cycle beginning to unfold into the next, or multiple different evolution cycles. And so there's an intensity. You could compare it to the intensity, as someone is going through the birthing process. Intensity, momentum, build, the closer it gets time for the baby to actually be born. It builds and builds and builds, and that's what we're experiencing now, and that's why things are crazier than ever. So not only in our own lives, but throughout reality. So things are not only more intense for the more progressive consciousness-oriented beings here, but the regressive dominant beings here are starting to feel a sense of panic and fear and so they're really, that they may lose control of this reality as we unfold into the next iterations and evolution cycles of this reality and various versions of this reality. So there's a lot of energy, a lot of energy within and around us. And not only the wisest, but the kindest thing we can do for ourselves is to dive more deeply into, or begin if we haven't, the process of regaining self-mastery. That's our relief valve, so to speak. And only you can determine your level of desire and commitment in this process, in this work. And it is work. Work like no other. It's incomparable. It is, on the one hand, the most time-focused, energy-intensive work that can be incredibly painful because of all that it entails and all the other energies around us, while at the same time being the most amazingly rewarding work that you'll ever undertake in this lifetime. The most rewarding experiences and opportunities for flowering, for becoming your highest possible, the highest possible expression of core self soul in this reality at this time. I can't think of any other journey that's more exciting, more empowering, and more fruitful. Okay, so now I'm going to get back to meditation because that's a foundational process in beginning to attain mastery of thought. But, okay, let's begin with the passive meditation. That's a good place to start. The closed eyes, place of solitude type of clearing of thoughts. Taking time to do that with the intention of clearing the way for consciousness, opening the flow of consciousness, flushing out distortions, those false beliefs and attachments and ego identifications and emotions that need to be cleared in order to enable the widest flow of consciousness through this mind-body complex. So taking a few minutes at least to meditate, and I'll tie that in now to, before we even deal with thought, take a few minutes of closed eye consciousness prior to beginning to release in a responsible way and clear emotions. And there are multiple other videos that explain that process and how to do it responsibly, because we are responsible for all that we are emitting. And if we're clearing out regressive emotions and that energy, then we need to dispose of it with responsibility. Feel it, release it, and properly, responsibly dispose of it. So there's other videos about that, and of course I work with people in this area all the time. So taking those 2 steps on a daily basis for a while. Clearing, clearing, clearing. If you're new to this journey, that's the best possible place to start, is start clearing. And those are 2 powerful, empowering first steps to take. Then after a little time, you can step into the next level, a slightly more advanced level. And that's to begin taking your meditative process to the streets, as it were. And you can begin doing that by learning to quiet the mind when you're out and about. Maybe you're walking in the park. Maybe you're out shopping. Maybe you are sitting in nature. Another huge, empowering thing to do is connecting with nature. But even though there are other people around, you are in, and this is what I call it, active meditation. You're learning to quiet the mind, to gently push away all thoughts, while you are wide-eyed and fully alert. Because most people in the closed eye meditation, the passive state of meditation, over the course of time, or I should say early on, it many times is almost like an alpha state as opposed to an awake beta state of functioning. And that's all good and well. That's not a judgment. That's just an observation. To advance our progress, we're looking at a beta state of meditation. You can begin practicing in some of these areas, bringing it to the streets, as I said. And then the most advanced level of passive meditation is to achieve no thought, whatever you're doing. Whether you're at work, having a conversation with someone, writing a paper or an article, but you're doing it from a state of no thought. And so many of you might say, well, how are you going to do that? How can I be doing things without thought? Well, first I'll give sort of an opposite example of the same thing. But it is not the same thing. But think about when you learn to drive. When you first learned, everything was really, you were really alert and aware and sensitive to everything around you. The mechanisms of the car, the dashboard, the traffic, everything. You're just in that full beta state of awareness. But as time moved on, driving became second nature to you. Doesn't mean that you're no longer alert, but to some extent, you're kind of on autopilot. Or perhaps when you're doing some household chore that you've done a million times before, if you're not fully present and alert, then you're on autopilot. So autopilot would be kind of the regressive opposite of alert presence, active meditative state of no thought while you are moving through reality in all of your daily activities and interactions with people. And I've worked with several people in the advanced active meditation who were concerned about it because they were worried that somehow they would be dumbed down if they didn't have access to thought, that their thoughts would go away, that they would lose their powers and tools of logic and reason and so forth. And it's completely the opposite of that. When you're in a place wherein you are the master of the mind, and you have chosen not to allow any thoughts in, that's how consciousness, higher order consciousness, that's how you begin to embody that. And when that's flowing through you, you're at peace, you're fully present. Therefore, your vibrational rate increases. And when you are doing an activity, performing an activity wherein thought on some level is needed, such as communicating with another, either verbally or in the written word, then the highest possible higher order knowledge shows up, you attract in the form of higher order thoughts that serve you, that flow through you in your work, in that communication. That higher order flow state. We've all had that experience many times, actually. And oftentimes, at least earlier on, for those of us on this journey, or before we were consciously on this journey, we've had the experience. We just didn't know what it was, what was really going on. We just know that, whatever it was that we just did, whether it was, like I said, writing or maybe creating a work of art, painting. We just gave a talk. We just wrote a paper. We just, or perhaps an architect, just created a design. And there's some awareness. You step back and you go, wow, where did this come from? Wow. And most people attribute it to the brain or the mind alone, when that's not the case. Consciousness, the opening, the ability, the flow of consciousness was opened up to a greater point, and that's what flowed through the individual. And the more at peace and in the flow the individual is in a particular process or communication or activity, the less conscious thought around it, the higher the level of the output will be. More creativity, more originality, more access to intelligent awareness, knowledge will be exhibited in that creation. That's how it goes. So ultimately, what the seeker is looking to achieve is to function through a state of, or to move through without, to move through this reality without conscious thought. To become so filled with, embodied by soul consciousness, this higher order consciousness that is peace, that is harmony, that is awareness, that a new reality can unfold through the creations of that higher order state of being. Make sense? I certainly hope so. And I hope that this video was of benefit to you, that, and if it was, that if you haven't already, you will subscribe to these commentaries. And the best place to do that, if you're on YouTube, is to visit my website and subscribe there, because you'll also be notified of articles and other resources as they're published, in addition to being notified of the commentaries as they come out. And also I'm going to urge you again, and the information is provided below, to visit James Bartley's website. If you aren't already aware of his work, I strongly urge you to do that. It is a hugely consciousness expanding experience on every level. He's very holistic, and that's one of the purposes of, or one of the aspects to self-mastery, is a continual focused intention of expanding awareness of everything, of all that's going on around you, and in terms of this work. And his side, it's a holistic process. Self-mastery is holistic by its very nature, because you're dealing not only with all the energies and the energy centers, thoughts and emotions, and if you're working with chakras and the energy field, but the mind-body physical complex itself, the body, you know, bringing that up to its peak performance capacities, you know, your mental, emotional, and physical abilities to peak performance level. Becoming master over the various areas of your life, career, relationships, how you spend your downtime, and all of that. It's very holistic. And James' website really helps you open, 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 open. So I hope you'll visit that. And uh, Jerry's website, that's also posted on James' website at the link that I'm going to provide, the link to the interview that inspired this two-part commentary. It's a must-see. In any case, I thank you for being with me. Um, if this video was of benefit to you, please share it with others. And until we meet again, take care, stay strong on your journey, and I look forward to being with you again soon. Bye-bye.